Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joins us now. Colonel, always a pleasure. Colonel, can we agree that sensitive operational information about a military attack is secret, whether it is formally characterized as classified or not?
No question about it. In fact, I would say as a soldier, as a matter of fact, as any member of the armed forces, it is the most delicate and sensitive information you could possibly leak.
We are talking, of course, about the information posted on a chatting app by the Secretary of State, which included the nature of the attack, the equipment to be used, the time it was going to happen, which could only have come from plans drawn up secretly, quite appropriately secretly, by military commanders and presented to him. This isn't something he made up out of thin air.
Let me give you a real example of that kind of information. George Tenet was leaning into the Secretary of State in his conference room on the top floor of the CIA out at Langley. And the Secretary of State was insisting, Colin Powell, that he be allowed to use a certain piece of intelligence in his presentation at the United Nations. Tenet was objecting strenuously to it. Tenet finally used the argument he knew would resonate with Colin Powell. He said, "Mr. Secretary," this is almost a direct quote from memory, but my memory's pretty good on this. "Mr. Secretary, if you reveal that information and we do put troops on the ground in Iraq, it will endanger their lives in a fundamental way." And the Secretary scratched it. That's how.
What's the information that Secretary Hegseth posted? If in the hands of the wrong people, capable of impairing the lives of United States military personnel under Hegseth's command.
Just think of the fact that he gave out some of the times on target and the routing and the type of ordnance and airplanes and such. Now, thankfully, Al-Ansar is probably not, the Houthis have probably not got access. They might in the future to the kind of significant counterintelligence or whatever means you might want to call it that would pick that up, sift it, and then apply it to actually bring damage to the people doing the attack. That's the fortunate thing here. The time lapse was too short, and the fact that the Houthis are probably not that sophisticated, that helped. That kept the information from being damaging.
Here's what Secretary Heggs, he's given a number of statements, but here's what he said when asked if war plans were texted. He has repeatedly said nothing was classified. I guess that means he didn't bother to classify it.
Yeah.
But we all know that certain things are secret by their nature, whether they've been formally classified or not. And among those secret things are attack plans. Oh, but why did you call it attack plans? Listen to this and look at his body language.
Imagine if you had released this kind of information on the battlefield in Ukraine, where the Russians have the instantaneous capability to take advantage of it. Faster.
Watch his body language, Colonel. Chris, number 13.
Nobody's texting war plans. Well, I noticed this morning out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans. There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
Is that hogwash?
From what I have heard and what I have actually seen in our own press, yes, it's absolute hogwash. It's obfuscation to try and cover the fact that this small group of the Principals Committee made a grievous error.
You, of course, have experienced the highest of security clearances in conversations in which you participated. Did the cavalier nature of this surprise you, or is that standard operating procedure when deciding who to kill?
Inside the small group, or even in the principals committee itself, not in the statutory NSC normally, you will hear this kind of conversation quite frequently. It's not so much banter as it is an attempt to relieve the pressure on the people having to make some pretty critical decisions.
Okay.
I can't say that for this group, but that's my experience of it. The deputies committee, for example, just below the principals, is a similar environment, and the deputies is probably where the most interesting and most strategic conversations go on. That said, I've got to say that you're looking at, and we look at this like, what a bunch of amateurs. Okay, that's a fair characterization. But let me tell you, we haven't had a national security advisor since Brent Scowcroft. We have not. We just pick people to be in this job. People who have no credentials for it. I would say H.R. McMaster had no credentials for it, even though he was a general officer. The last one I would say was really good was Brent Scowcroft. Brent Scowcroft was one of the most brilliant lieutenant generals, strategist, thinker, collegial operator in the principals and the statutory committee I've ever seen. Now, he had H.W. Bush over him, a very experienced president. We haven't had one of those since H.W. Bush. And so it made a whole heck of a lot of difference. But the decision-making was so much more methodical, so much more strategic, careful, and nothing like this probably would have ever happened. I can't say it wouldn't happen, but it probably never would have happened. I think this just reeks of amateur hour.
I want you to look at a clip that we're going to play for you of Congressman Crow, who's a former Navy SEAL, grilling Director Gabbard. And the question I'm going to ask you is if you think that Director Gabbard and Director Ratcliffe lied under oath when they said there were no battle plans, war plans, attack plans, however you want to characterize them, on the texting or aired to the texting group. Chris, cut number 10.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DoD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
Well, she looks like she'd rather be any place else in the world than there. Why did she, or can you possibly explain to us, Colonel, how she and CIA Director Ratcliffe in the prior day could have denied that military plans had been posted in that chat?
Well, they got together and they made their stories sync. Same thing any administration would do, but they happened to sync terribly. The basic line was it wasn't an operational war plan. It wasn't an O Plan 5001 or an O Plan 5000 or any O Plan or a con plan or any other kind of formal war plan. It was operational data. Anyone who thinks that's not classified is smoking some cheap stuff.
Colonel, if you define espionage as the federal statutes do, the willful or negligent failure to retain in a secure environment national security secrets, did the Secretary of State, excuse me, did the Secretary of Defense commit espionage.
John Kiriaku's judge put him in jail, as I recall, for about 3 years for 3 charges under the same act, one of which was very similar.
About 15 minutes before we went on air, the Attorney General of the United States announced, to my dismay, there will be no FBI criminal investigation of what happened in this chat. So the DOJ, which has suffered egregiously, and the FBI, which has suffered egregiously in the minds of the public, shoots itself in the foot again.
Agreed. And I just hope that without even a spur of this sort of accountability, that it doesn't happen again. But this kind of recklessness and this kind of amateur hour seems to me to permeate the cabinet of Donald Trump. And I think that's a shame because he should be better served. But when you pluck people, look at Waltz. Waltz came from Florida. He'd been a congressman. I have to submit that the modern Congress, bought and paid for as it mostly is not the place you want to pluck a national security advisor from. Or for that matter, probably you don't want to pluck a cabinet officer from there. And I would go on to say that Marco Rubio, to this point, although I hate to say this because I had some hope that he would be better, has proven my point.
The word inside the Beltway is that Marco Rubio is miserable and feels that he has been co-opted by the president's choice of Steve Witkoff as the lead negotiator in the hotspots around the world.
Part of that, Judge, is the fact that when you watch Witkoff, as much as I think he's operating from a businessman's perspective rather than a diplomat's, he's mild-mannered, he's well-spoken, he completes his sentences, he's not diatribe-like.
Right.
He's the one member of the administration that seems to be an adult.
I agree with you, even though I was initially taken aback by his having that job. I guess I guess the president gave him a top secret security clearance. The president can give that to anybody he wants, even though Mr. Witkoff, of course, does not have a government job and was not confirmed by the Senate.
I can understand Marco Rubio's feelings. Colin Powell told the president of the United States, I do not want any special envoys. And the president looked at him and said, you don't like special envoys? And he said, I'm the Secretary of State.
Wow, good for him. I can't see Secretary Rubio getting away with speaking to President Trump that way. He may say it or he may think it, but I can't see him getting away with it. You mentioned Mike Waltz. Chris, play the back and forth between Mike Waltz and Laura Ingraham. Now, she backs off a little bit, but it looked like she was about to bore into him about how this happened. Tell me if you think his explanation, which is a little silly, is credible.
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your phone?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That is what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in,
you that
it gets
contact.
sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was?
So
on
the
chat?
person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
Who
guy.
was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, okay. Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So
you know of this fellow Jeffrey Goldberg, and you know from your years in the State Department how Vice President Cheney used Goldberg to promote a propagandistic view of the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think this was intentional? Do you think it was a PR stunt? Do you think it was sabotage? There's a piece in The Guardian claims that MI6 pulled this off to humiliate Trump because the Brits hate him or fear him.
Let me say, first of all, that comment that he made initially about everybody out there, everybody out there is not the national security advisor to the president of the United States, Mr. Waltz. So that was a very bad start. I've heard all manner of things, Judge. I don't have any respect for Jeffrey Goldberg, never have had, ever since I learned he was an IDF member, a prison guard.
Yeah.
Took a look at his book. And ever since I had to deal with Judy Miller at the New York Times over the Iraq War. And I know what Israel does within our security complex to create imbroglios like this, to create little episodes like this. Normally, they're created in order for them to get pressure-bearing data on the president of the United States or some other principal in the administration. That's why they happen. So I'm not going to stand back and say that there isn't some of that going on here.
Colonel, is the United States preparing for war with Iran?
I don't think so. I think Trump is doing his standard thing. We can go back to the first administration and Kim Jong-un when he was going to bring hell on North Korea. He builds these precipices of threats and braggadocio, and then from that, he commences negotiations, or one hopes he will commence negotiations. And frankly, from what I'm hearing from Tehran, they're very receptive. They're not receptive to the pressure. In fact, he may be overdoing that a bit. But they are very receptive to going ahead and trying another deal, which I find astonishing because they have been ripped apart on the first deal. We have to look at that first deal. That first deal was an agreement between the Perm 5 in Germany, all of those members in Germany, and the world, really, in terms of international law. And it was codified in the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran that President Obama effected. Doesn't matter whether the Senate ratified it or not to Iran. Iran is looking at a state doing this, just like they are, state-to-state relations. And we reneged, and the current president is the one who reneged. So I would have, unless I was really under duress, and I think they are, I think our sanctions are putting them under duress, I would never come back to negotiate with Washington again. I'd be like Putin. They're the most duplicitous sons of bitches on the face of the earth. Why negotiate with them?
Let's go back to the signal conversation. Are Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth competent?
The latter, I think not. The former, judgment's still out, but thus far, my tendency is to say no. He's in the lineup that we've had. So you know why Reagan had 6, Judge? Reagan had 6 because he didn't think national security advisor should be president. He kept his first national security advisor from even darkening his door. And when he got to Powell and Carlucci at the end, he finally found some men who actually wanted to work for him and not for themselves. And he allowed them to actually be fairly significant in his administration. But he went through his first 4 national security advisors because he didn't like the position. It's not subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. It's not a really hard constitutional position. It's just an invented position. And he didn't like it. And frankly, I don't blame him.
What does the national security advisor do besides set up these group chats?
Well, if he's Alexander Haig, he goes out and says, I'll take care of everything.
I'm in charge here.
Yeah, makes an ass of himself. Or if he's Condi Rice, instead of disciplining the system like Brent Scowcroft did, the ideal national security advisor has one job and one job alone. And he never goes to the press, or rarely does so. He never gives a public face to himself, or rarely does so. He disciplines the national security decision-making process. That's their job. Condi Rice started out doing that, looked pretty good at it. And then she figured out very quickly that Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld were going to win most of the arguments, and that Bush's predisposition was towards them. And if she wanted to be Secretary of State, she had to go toward them. And she did. And she fought Powell all the way. She got what she wanted. She got Secretary of State. And probably she wouldn't have if she'd taken Powell's position from time to time. That's the kind of national security advisor you do not need.
Well, today, the national security advisor, if you look at Jake Sullivan, Sullivan probably was on the Sunday morning talk shows more than Anthony Blinken. And certainly Mike Waltz is on more than Marco Rubio. Who speaks for the administration?
Had Powell been alive, he would have been calling me and saying, Jake ought to get his ass off the phone. I mean, off the TV screen. That's just not something the National Security Advisor should do, because you're usurping the president's prerogatives when you do that. Now, Biden allowed him. That shows what a novice Biden was to the presidency. It's not what you should be doing.
Colonel, big picture now, not the anger or disappointment or fear or political criticism of the moment, but big picture. Is this a big deal? Does this reveal the type of warts, human warts, that Donald Trump should know about and do something about?
If it's fundamental, and this is not enough to judge that by, because this is a very new administration, a very new team. But if it repeats itself, I'd get worried if I were the president. In fact, I'd get rid of somebody, or maybe somebody's plural. It doesn't look good. And it doesn't look good for the president, and it's dangerous.
Can Donald Trump say no to Bibi Netanyahu if Bibi says we want to attack Tehran and we need your cover?
I think he can. I think he may be. This is one place where Hegseth may be right. That diatribe he gave was absolute nonsense, saying there's never been such a serious president of the United States as Donald Trump. You forget George Washington, you forget Franklin Roosevelt, you forget Abraham Lincoln. There's been a few. But I do think Trump wants a deal. I do think he wants a deal. I don't think he wants a war.
Colonel, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. You look very good today, sir.
Thank you. I feel old.
You don't sound or look old, I'll tell you that.
Take care.
And the foreword you wrote on Scott Ritter's book, Highway to Hell, is a fabulous, fabulous piece and manifestation of all the lessons you've learned in all the years of your service. And I hope that when people read Scott's book, they start with that foreword that you wrote.
Judge, I'll leave you with a note of optimism. I gave a speech in Berlin via Zoom last week, and I'm getting reports back similar. And I was trying to do that for the Europeans, especially the Germans. I was trying to tell them how dangerous this world is.
Thank you, Colonel. All the best.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next week. And coming up later today at 3:30 this afternoon, Professor John Mearsheimer. Tomorrow, Friday, 4 o'clock, The Boys Intelligence Community Roundtable. And after The Boys at 5 p.m., midnight in Yemen, Pepe Escobar. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.